Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about conducting vendor cyber risk assessments in as little as 60 minutes. And the key question we're going to ask here is it possible? Today is not intended to be any way a sales presentation. So if you do feel that I am trying to be overly salesy, do feel free to throw some virtual cyber rotten tomatoes at me. My name is Ronan Lavelle, and I run a company called Elasticito, and we are a niche cyber advisory firm and provide technology solutions that help companies to identify, assess, and then manage cyber risk. So everything we do really revolves around this very particular topic. A little bit of house rules for today. We're going to record the session and we will send out a recording link after the session, probably tomorrow morning, if that's okay. You are also muted, but we do welcome your questions. And if you have a question, please feel free to type in the question and answer. It's a Q&A button somewhere on your screen. Maybe try not to use the chat function, as chats are recorded in the screen share. So unless you want people to view the recording with your chats, try not to use that. And I'll answer the questions at the end of the session, if that's all right. I thought I might very quickly run a quick poll just to understand the kind of environment that you are operating in. And if it's okay, I'm going to ask you, roughly on an annual basis, how many vendor risk assessments, particularly cyber ones, does your company, on average, do you think conducts? And I'll give you guys a few minutes or a few seconds to look at that. Thank you very much. I'll just share those results with you. So it's kind of a third, a third, a third. So very little to actually, I think 25 to around 50, 26 to 50 assessments a year. It's a fair amount of work. And obviously what we're going to share today is a little bit of the pain, but also some of the pleasure, hopefully, that will come from fixing the cyber risk assessment process. So first, I want to just quickly touch on the topic of why are we doing this, and why have cyber risk assessments become so prevalent in the last 3 or 4 years. And really, it's all, I guess, about digital transformation. So we are sharing data with a lot more external parties. We're also giving external vendors and partners and third parties access to our facilities and access to our systems in some cases as well. And so all those areas with little red circles around them are examples of where data or access to your data and your premises is commonly shared with external parties. So it's very important when we onboard them or when we are evaluating these parties to understand what are they going to be doing with our data? Do they have internal processes and practices that might treat our data with all the due care and attention that we would? And so we ask some questions. And commonly, this is obviously done in the format of questionnaires. And risk assessment questionnaires are super important. Let's not doubt that fact. But they have become quite a burden. And as the net recipient of many of these, and my team, we do dread receiving them. We do understand the importance of why people ask the questions, but they're a burden for us, the recipient, and they're quite often a burden for you, the assessor. And these things can be a lot of work for a lot of people. This particular one on the screen, if you can see this, is actually 1,600 questions long. That's a lot of questions. And if you get any more than one of these every couple of weeks, then you're kind of doing this as your job as well as all your other jobs. So these things can be really arduous to assess and also to respond to if you are the assessor. So what we'd like to do today is to try and help you to make a bit of a case to automate this process. We totally understand and recognize that a technology solution, maybe like the one we're going to show you today, is not a panacea. It's not perfect, but it can be better than nothing. We're also very cognizant that when we look at things like questionnaire-based assessments, these things for many companies have been put in place for many, many years. And in fact, if we're talking about cyber risk assessments, they may well have started out um, in the kind of other areas. So things like financial, economic, geopolitical type of questionnaires and compliance-based questions. So we're very cognizant of the fact that these are maybe well set in business processes, but they are nonetheless things that take a lot of time, involve a lot of people in some cases, and are quite expensive in terms of time and resources on both sides, your side as the assessors and the assessees, if you like, the evaluatees on your vendor and third party side. So some research just last year by a company called Prevalent showed that on average, it takes about 4 weeks to go through a new vendor risk assessment process. And that's kind of insane per entity. So if you are onboarding 10, 30, 50 new vendors, that does add up to a lot of additional work. And for those of you who are not dedicated risk professionals, but you're in, say, information security, we do know and we do feel for you, this is additional work on top of everything else generally that you need to do. So what we're going to try and propose is a way of doing this with the same level of effectiveness or greater, but with far fewer resources and much less time, and obviously much less cost as well. So if we break this down, this is how our friends at Gartner split out the kind of 5 key stages of assessing and monitoring cyber risk with third parties. And we reckon with our estimations, the bars in yellowy orange are the kind of contributions we think that automating technologies can contribute to these very traditionally manual processes. And when I say manual processes, I recognize that a lot of companies will send out risk questionnaires as a spreadsheet via email. But we also are very aware that they may also be using some kind of automated portal with workflows that do improve the efficiency of the process to some degree. But we're really talking about, I guess, the stage 2 and stage 3 here, which is the risk assessment piece. So how do you get your third party when you send this to a human being, or more than one human being in some cases, how do you get them to respond to your questionnaire, whether it's through a wizard-based online system or through a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet? And then how do you analyze those results and understand what the risk profile of that company is? And then how do you monitor them on an ongoing basis? So these are the kind of questions that we are going to pose. And hopefully the areas that we're going to try and help you understand what kind of tools are out there to maybe help this. So our goal in this area here is to really help you as either cyber risk professionals or information security professionals to really focus on what you do best and adding value, which is analysis, and not on duplicating and inefficient administration. So what we want to do is automate as much of that paperwork and inefficient process-based work and enable you to have the data to make risk-based decisions. So how does this all work? So what we are not saying here is we're not saying get rid of your security questionnaires. In fact, what we are saying is in the platform I'm going to show you live in about 5 minutes, or 2 minutes in fact, we are going to upload your security questionnaire. Or if you don't even like your security questionnaire, which many customers, companies maybe don't, and they want to look at other best practice questionnaires, you can use other questionnaires as well. But what we are saying is that when you ask a human being to respond to 1,600 questions or 50 questions or 200 questions, whatever it is in your own security assessment questionnaires, we are saying that human beings are the weak link here. So they're the weak link for several reasons. One, they are the ones that are inefficient. If you ask very specific questions about wide areas of a company's security and compliance practices, it's very fair to imagine that they may need to share that questionnaire with other internal stakeholders to respond to. And obviously, when you do that, you're just simply compounding the time lag problem. And we also know, by the way, when we need to do cyber risk assessments, it's often because the business want or need to onboard a new vendor. And we work with many customers who feedback information to us that they feel that information security are a logjam in that process sometimes, and they don't understand why it takes so slow to conduct cyber risk assessments. So what we would contend, and our original theory, which we believe we've gone some way down the line to prove, is that all of the data that a human being would manually answer in a questionnaire, well, I say all, but I would say most of the data that a human being would manually answer in a questionnaire already exists in pre-existing reference material in most companies. So in my company, in Elasticito, we have a bunch of policy documentation, which we have on file. We could also have existing vendor questionnaires that we've filled out for other companies in the past. We may also have things like ISO 27001 submission reports and documentation as well. So all of these materials that have unbiased information and data about your policies, your practices, and your procedures around data, privacy, security policies, all these kind of things, we would say these are great materials to input into your questionnaires. So what we say is, instead of having human beings to manually answer every single question, we simply invite our third-party companies to upload one or more, more is better, reference material documents like policies into a platform that we call Black Kite, and a little bit of magic happens. We go through this process of parsing. There's a thing called a universal parsing engine, and it reads through all the documentation and automatically extracts unstructured content and then applies it to your questionnaire. And what's more, once we have mapped out all the answers to your questions automatically, we will also automatically cross-reference it to up to 10 different compliance and risk-based frameworks. So not only are you answering your own questionnaire, but you're also mapping it to ISO and NIST and a whole load of other PCI, GDPR, etc. Frameworks. Okay, so I'm going to show you this live in 2 seconds, but just so you can visualize what we're trying to do here. Here is an example of where in a questionnaire, this one actually is for a COVID control item, we ask a question and we are automatically populating the answer with evidence that we've captured from a piece of reference material, a policy document, or some other submission document that we've already completed. And then we can map this to one or more other relevant frameworks for references. Okay, so I'm going to just really quickly pause my screen. Right. And flip over to this interface here. So what we're looking at here is a platform called Black Kite. I would ordinarily say it's not important, but actually it's very critically important to what we're going to show you today. But Black Kite is a cyber risk assessment platform that helps companies to monitor ongoing risks as well. And ordinarily, customers will use a platform like this, and we do, by the way, appreciate there are several options in this kind of area. But these tools are traditionally used to assess and then monitor the externally facing assets of a company. What we're going to do today is close the circle by completing the internal data that we want to ask a customer or a third party about what their internal policies and procedures are. So over in the top here, we can see a technical cyber risk rating, we can see a financial impact score, and we can see how does this company comply. I am, by the way, sharing Elasticito, our company's profile, with you, and we're doing that on purpose because I want to share this documentation with you. So if I go into this compliance section here, the first thing that I can see is a load of control items relating to cybersecurity risk compliance and risk frameworks. So everything from NIST 800 through to ISO 27001, GDPR, there's a whole load here. And you can see ordinarily that we would comply quite favorably to pretty much all of these frameworks here. So we're getting very good compliance scores. If you look at it in a different way in the histogram at the top here, the green bars are basically, yes, we are complying very well. The blue bars, however, and the blue circles in the circle graphics below denote the level of completeness. So in other words, we are complying very well with the questions that have been answered in these various questionnaires and these various frameworks. What we really want is high compliance ratings, but also high completeness. So what we could do, we could go into, say, the shared assessments report here, and this is a questionnaire that some of you may be familiar with. You can add in your own questionnaires as well. And this has got many, many questions. I could send this by Excel. I could ask people to upload their answers in this interface. But actually, I don't want to do that today. So actually, what I do want to do is I'm going to imagine I'm going to share access to this platform to you if you were one of my third parties or vendors. I'll give you a little set of instructions, very simple instructions to follow. You log in, there's no cost to a third party, and we simply ask you to click on this little button here called Upload File. There is a slider here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the language models that we're using behind this, but the semantic engine that allows you to switch from objective to subjective analysis of text. We're just going to leave that where it is for today. But what we are going to do is, instead of answering the question manually, we are going to upload one or more security documents. So I'm going to take this one here. It's our firewalls and routers policy. Okay, I'm going to wait for it to do its magic here. The Black Kite platform is importing this document, and what it's doing right now is it's parsing the content of that document and extracting what it thinks are the relevant pieces of information. I didn't say data because it is actually going to extract full paragraphs and sentences from this document as well. Okay, so it's done a little bit of magic in the background here. I'm just going to wait for it to finish doing what it's doing. Okay, so if we were to go into, say, PCI DSS here, here we can see, I hope you could, actually maybe it's not so important you can see this, but here is a control question, okay? It's about firewall and router configurations if you care. And this is the auto response from our policy documentation that it's automatically captured. Now, if you imagine I uploaded maybe a pre-completed questionnaire that I'd already done for somebody else, and my security policy documentation, maybe all three of the ones I showed you before, then we would have a really great body of content and knowledge there to feed this engine. But I'm just going to use the example of one document. We can already see a quick example of, here's a question, here's an answer. And we've already, by the way, mapped this to the other compliance frameworks that we think the content of that document where it might be relevant. So if I was to save the results of that, again, it's what it's doing now is it's going off into the different control frameworks, and it is mapping my answers. But if I want to go back into my example of that PCI DSS report, which is the one here, something very clever has just happened. So I think there was a one, okay, so build firewall and configure router configuration. So this is the question we were looking at. So here, it actually just says, I looked at the document, I confirmed with a 90-odd% confidence rate that we saw evidence that this was compliant, this question or this requirement was compliant. And I'm just going to put a reference now in the questionnaire. So in other words, I've asked a question, but instead of having a verbose answer, I'm just going to put a reference to say I've seen the question. Now, we do this for a very important reason. And this is basically like, I don't know, an immigration officer at an airport. So when you travel through a border, they might say, please, can I see your passport? And you give the immigration officer your passport, they open it up, they look at the passport page, they look at you, they look at the passport, they type some stuff in the computer and they go, yeah, fine, you can come in, you're all verified. And what do they do next? They don't keep your passport, they give it back to you. They might note in their system that they verified your identity and you have no criminal records or no reason to not enter the country. But that's exactly what we're doing here. And so we don't keep the document because in some countries, and in fact, in some companies, people can be very picky about sharing what they think is very proprietary documentation about their internal policies and procedures with external parties. So we simply use the reference material, parse it, check it, and then we delete it. So when I press save, we actually deleted all that documentation at the same time. So that's that. Now, if I go back to my front screen, this is where we were. So we were at a compliance level of 97% and a completeness level of 30%. So that meant we had enough evidence-based data to automatically answer 30% of the questions. If I now refresh my screen, and remember this is only after uploading one document on firewalls and routers, I can already now see that my compliance rating's gone up to 99%, which is great. But my completeness level has gone up to 51%. Now, I did mention before, this is not perfect. It is not a panacea. And it would be wonderful to think that this could get to 100% compliance and 100% completeness. But let's just say that it will not do that. Let's just say we get to 70 or 80% completeness. If you send me a 1,500 question questionnaire and somebody said I could auto answer 70% of the questions with evidence-based data, I think that would be quite an attractive option for me. So what we're trying to say here is you can focus on the questions that maybe haven't been answered or have not been answered to your satisfaction. But it's nonetheless potentially a much more convenient way to do risk assessments at scale. And maybe on that point, you can start to assess companies maybe far wider than you are today. We've seen some companies who only assess tier 1 or tier 2 or the most high risk vendors because this process is so time consuming and expensive to operate. So from this point forward, you can request that process to be refreshed at any stage you want, and then use this platform to then continually monitor this vendor and their cyber risk profile from that point forward. So I hope I've triggered some questions in your minds. If you do have any questions, again, just go into the Q&A button and section and just type your question, and we'll pick those up in a moment. Maybe one of them is, how on earth are we doing this? And I did by mistake share the slide a little bit before, but the answer is that this is based on a thing called BERT, which is a Google language model that was developed by Google and then open sourced. You can actually search on Google for BERT and find out exactly how BERT works. There are lots of different flavors of BERT, but basically it's a semantic language processing model that allows us to take and make meaning of unstructured content. Very awesome model, and is increasingly being used by lots of companies. So I'm going to stop there and maybe ask you if you have any questions. So again, if you do, please do feel free to type them in the dialog box. It's also totally okay to be shy and not ask questions. And if you wanted to write me a private message, if you had a question you didn't want to ask in an open forum, there's my email address. You can write any questions you like in your own time. Okay, so we have a quick question here, which is, can you reverse out an earlier policy, upload and replace it with a newer modified version? Yes, you can. And in fact, further than that, you can actually delete everything you've done. So you don't have to commit yourself to a compliance status at any time. You can go back and revert back to where it was, or you can do periodic refreshes of that content with your third party. It's actually also, for some of our clients, enabled them to request a change in the way that their third parties and their vendors update their policy documentation. So, quite often we put these things in place because somebody tells us to, like an auditor or a regulator or something like this. And I guess what we're saying is that you also now could or should be one of those key stakeholders that does influence the more, I guess, timely updates of that documentation, so that you can wipe what you see today and refresh it with a new view in whatever timeline, a quarter, a year, in 6 months, whatever. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I think I will give you back a few more minutes of your day. Having said this, one just very quickly came in, so I'll very quickly answer it if it's okay. So the question is, given that a confidence score is attributed to the results of the automatic analysis, are you able to decide to keep the original document or to manually assess it? And actually, the simple answer is yes. You can override and manually assess. And you can also adjust the confidence scoring. We would advise you have a conversation with us to understand a little bit more detail about how and why. But one of the answers to that question is understanding how BERT, the BERT language model works, and to understand how it calculates that level of confidence. You can adjust that up and down. And we have tested this, by the way, for non-English languages, and there is a way to do this in other languages as well. But to the person that asked that question, yes, you can override the answers, and yes, you can adjust the confidence sensitivity. Good. I think I will give you back some more minutes of your day. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope that you found it interesting, and I hope it wasn't too salesy, but we're hugely excited by this process and hope you are too. Thank you and goodbye.